I didn't lose everything the day I married my boss. I lost it slowly over years while telling myself I was lucky. I was 26 when I started working at the firm, nothing impressive. A mid-sized logistics company in a beige office building near the highway. The kind of place with flickering fluorescent lights and coffee that always tasted burned. I was hired as an administrative coordinator. Answer phones, schedule meetings, track invoices, fix small mistakes before they turned into big ones. I needed the job badly. My student loans were overdue. My roommate was moving out. I was sleeping badly and checking my bank balance every morning like it might magically change. My boss, Mark, was 41. Divorced, one kid who stayed with his ex most weekends. He wore the same rotation of button-downs and always looked slightly tired. Like he hadn't slept enough in years. He wasn't charming. He wasn't intimidating either. He was just present. He remembered people's names. He said thanks when you stayed late. He didn't yell when things went wrong. At that point in my life, that felt rare. My days became predictable. I'd get to the office at 8:12 a.m. every morning, park in the far lot because the closer spots were reserved for management, swipe my badge, drop my bag under my desk. Mark usually arrived around 8:30. He'd walk past my desk, nod, and say, "Morning." Sometimes he'd stop and ask if the schedule for the week was finalized. Sometimes he'd just keep walking. Nothing special. We worked long hours during the busy season. Everyone did. I stayed late more than I needed to, partly because overtime helped, partly because going home to my quiet apartment felt heavier than staying under office lights. That's how things started. Not with flirting, not with tension, just time. The first change was small. One night, around 7 p.m., the office was almost empty. Mark walked by my desk and asked if I wanted to order food since we were both still there. I said yes because I was hungry. We ate Thai food out of plastic containers, sitting at the conference table, laptops open between us. We talked about work, then his son's soccer games, then my loans. It wasn't personal in a romantic way. It was just two adults talking honestly because there was no one else around. When we left, he held the door for me. That was it. But something shifted. After that night, things felt different in quiet ways. He started looping me into decisions earlier, asking my opinion before meetings. I started noticing when he looked tired, when he skipped lunch. Once, during a stressful week, he rubbed his temples and said, "Some days, I wonder if any of this is worth it." He didn't look at me when he said it. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded and said, "Yeah." That was the moment I should have created distance. I didn't. The first time he touched me, it wasn't dramatic. He leaned over my desk to point at something on my screen. His hand rested briefly on my shoulder. Too long to be accidental. Too short to be obvious. I felt it for hours. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell myself what it meant. When we finally crossed the real line months later, it felt logical. He asked if I wanted to get coffee outside the office. Then dinner. We talked about boundaries, about being careful. He said, "I don't want this to mess up your career." That sounded responsible. I believed him. We didn't tell anyone at work. I told myself it wasn't unethical, because I wasn't reporting directly to him anymore. HR adjusted my reporting line quietly. On paper, everything looked fine. In reality, I was now sleeping with the person who signed my paycheck. Our relationship stayed quiet. No public displays, no office gossip. At first, it felt mature. But slowly, my world narrowed. I stopped venting to friends because they wouldn't understand. I skipped happy hours because it felt awkward. When people talked about office politics, I stayed silent. I was careful with my words, careful with my expressions, careful all the time. The realization didn't hit me during a fight. It hit me one afternoon when I overheard two coworkers whispering near the break room. One said she's lucky. The other said, "Yeah, must be nice." They didn't know anything for sure, but they assumed. And I realized something quietly devastating. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how competent I was, this relationship had erased my credibility. Not loudly, just permanently. When Mark proposed, it wasn't romantic. We were sitting on his couch. His son was asleep in the other room. He said, "I don't want to keep living in two separate worlds." I said yes, because I was already halfway gone from my old life. We announced it at work the following Monday. People smiled, congratulated us, but everything changed. Conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. Emails got colder. I was no longer part of the team. I was the boss's wife. After we married, HR suggested it might be best if I moved departments, then suggested a different role, then suggested remote work. Each suggestion sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they erased me. I went from being involved to being invisible. When layoffs happened the following year, my name wasn't on the list. But neither was my future. At home, things weren't better. Mark was always tired, always distracted. Work followed him everywhere. When I tried to talk about how isolated I felt, he'd say, "You knew this wouldn't be easy." He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't listening either. The marriage didn't end with a blow-up. It ended with silence, with separate routines, separate beds. One morning, I realized I couldn't remember the last time he asked how my day was. I moved out quietly. No lawyers at first, no drama, just a signed lease and boxes. I don't blame him entirely. I made choices. I ignored warnings. I mistook stability for safety. Now, years later, I work somewhere else. No one knows my story unless I tell it. Sometimes when I see younger women talking about workplace relationships, I want to warn them, but I don't, because advice only works when someone is ready to hear it. I didn't lose everything at once. I lost it slowly, and by the time I noticed, there was nothing left to hold on to.